Welcome everybody to the top 10 mistakes in security operations centers, incident handling, and response. So, my name is Paul Jorgensen. I have been working in information security for a little bit over 20 years now. Started out as a techie doing primarily firewalls and VPNs, got into doing some Unix and Windows security, and then as soon as I got good at that, they moved me on into something else. Eventually I got into management, where I built a security program for my employer, and for the last 3.5 years I've been doing consulting. A security architect where I helped build several SOCs, and now in my current role, all that I do is help companies build SOCs. Some of them are totally in-house operations, some of them are more of a hybrid with some outsourcing with a managed security services provider, and just about every flavor in between. I do a lot of stuff with Fortune 100 companies as a result, primarily with banks and in the financial industry, but I've played around in some other areas too. I got to do my big plug for the PVC Security Podcast. You all, of course, subscribe and listen religiously every week to this, but just in case you do not, pvcsec.com, where you can find out all this wonderful information. And just about an hour ago, we recorded an episode here as well. So, and if you're going to be attending B-Sides Detroit and Converge, we're going to do a live session. So do attend that if you get a chance. So, number one, the first thing that I typically see when I go into these environments is that they want to reinvent the wheel. A lot of organizations, when they start talking about SOC and their security programs, they think that they are so unique. Anything that exists out there just is not going to fit them. So they have to start over from scratch. It's never true. And in fact, inside of their own organization, there might be a lot of excellent resources that they could use to either build their SOC or to improve it. So, for example, if a company has a particularly mature network operations center, there might be some processes that they have that could be brought into the SOC, tweaked for security, boom, they're up and running right away with these things. But so often, companies don't look within themselves for these kinds of resources. Part of it, too, is that they don't do a very good job then of fitting inside of their organization. So security teams will go, they'll write up these great processes and procedures, they'll come up with their incident handling and have these various plans, but they haven't talked to anybody. They haven't talked to the IT team, which they're going to need if they're doing any kind of incident response, because you have to get the server people involved, maybe your network team, maybe somebody else. If your processes and procedures don't match what theirs are, then you're losing time, you're losing efficiency. There are gaps that are going to exist. If you need to then go and involve parts of the business, like say legal, HR, corporate communications, your processes probably don't line up with what they do either. So now you've got a bad handoff there. You've got potential gaps. You're potentially slow in your response. So you want to make sure that when you're doing these, you're talking to these other organizations that you're going to be interacting with to make sure that your processes and procedures are going to fit with them. What about existing tools that might be out there? One of the things that we see quite often with companies that are either building a SOC or looking to improve it is, and this is coming up in another slide as well, we got to go buy shiny boxes. We need some blinking lights in this environment, and we're very excited to go get those. But, one of the first things you need to look for is a log management solution. Your IT team probably already has one that you can make use of. And not only then can you make use of it, but they can make use of it as you're going and adding more systems into it as well. You both get a better view over your environment. So look for this kind of stuff that already exists out there. And if you do this, it helps you get some quick wins under your belt. because building a SOC is an expensive proposition. Not a lot of companies have a lot of tolerance for dropping that kind of money for something that doesn't seem to directly relate to the business and how the business makes money. So if you can get some quick wins out there and show some positive momentum right away by not reinventing the wheel, you look really good to the business. And these various other organizations like the NOC that I mentioned and some others, they might have some use cases that already exist that you can then take in and modify, because presumably they're geared towards the business and what's important to the business. Which brings us to number 2, not leveraging standards and frameworks. Like we're all familiar with the alphabet soup that are standards and frameworks that exist out there in the world. Some of them we have no choice but to enjoy and embrace. I don't know about you, but I love me some 853. Anybody else like to go through these NIST things? There you go. Yeah, you know that's right. So there's value in these. As painful as they are, there is value in these. And so the ones that you have to follow because you're in critical infrastructure, for example, or healthcare, or what have you, you can dive into and embrace and love those. But some of these other ones have good ideas in them. So even if you're not held to one of these, it's a good idea to get familiar with them and look at where you can leverage these inside of your environment, again, to help you identify gaps that you may have or areas that you're not as strong. And then use that to go back to your internal organization, because now it's not just you saying, hey, we should be doing this, but you've got something to go and point to and say, these are industry standards. And so if we want to be a competent, capable, effective SOC, we should be doing some of these things. But you don't necessarily have to follow these religiously. And it's okay to go through and say, this section of 853 we're going to do, and then we're going to grab this piece out of SABSA, because that fits our business better than maybe something that exists in COBIT, right? So look these things over, get comfortable with them. Use them to your advantage. These are tools as much as anything, right? And there's no organization out there that's above trying to adhere to some standards. It just makes it better, makes it so that you have a confidence in what you've been doing, helps make things repeatable, measurable, and effective. So don't be scared of these. And if you have a good GRC team inside of your environment, they'll become your best friends, because nobody wants to talk about that stuff. Isolationism. This is a big one, and I touched on it before. A lot of security organizations exist in their own little bubble. They exist in their own little silo. They don't like to go outside, and the folks on the outside don't like coming to the security organization. And why? When they ask a question, what's our number one answer? No. Give that man a balloon animal. It's true. We say no a lot. And quite often, we're right. It's the right answer. Unfortunately, it doesn't help the person that's coming to us asking us these questions. We need to go and engage with these people. We need to ask some additional questions to find out, why are they looking to do this? What's the business driver behind it? If we don't do it, what are the implications? Are there any standards or guidelines that we have to follow in order to deploy this thing? And now, let's sit down, the two of us plus any other pieces of the organization we need to get involved, and let's figure out how to make this thing happen, where you're meeting your goals, and I'm taking care of what I need to do on the security side. So how does this relate to SOC, incident handling, and incident response? If you're engaging with these folks as they're coming up with these solutions to their problems, and they are seeing you as a helper, an enabler of the business and technology, when you need them, when the world is ending, because you're getting smashed by some kind of bad actor out there in the world, and you need their help, guess what? They're going to be more willing to help you because you didn't say no. You said no, but let's see what we can do. And of course, it's not just with IT, right? It is with the whole business. We need to be working with the business operations folks. We need to be working with the corporate folks. They need to know what the SOC does. They need to know how the incident handlers work, how we do incident response. If we have to hit the big red button and get our CCERT involved, maybe some kind of an ERS program engaged, they need to know and understand and have confidence in what we do and how we do it. And we can't convey that message to them and get that level of confidence if we're sitting there in our own little bubble. If we're off in a locked room, off in a corner, maybe a basement somewhere, we don't really like windows. So we need to get out. We need to engage. We need to make this stuff tangible to these people. And another good point on this too. Politics. Anybody familiar with politics here? Yeah, again, if you can engage with these folks, if they see you as a partner and not as a roadblock from a political perspective, when you need to go, say, and buy the next new big, shiny, cool toy to go plug into your SOC, makes that process a lot easier. If, say, the CFO sees value in what you're doing, or the COO knows that you helped come up with a better communications program with their various trading partners, right? Makes that stuff a lot easier. And you should really, for your SOC, you should really have cross-functional governance. So it shouldn't just be security people running the SOC. You should have a governance layer up on the top that involves the business, involves IT, right? They're not making the decisions, but they're helping to guide and direct the SOC. Again, to make sure that we're focused on what's most important to the business. Which brings us to communication. And I really wanted to find a good clip of this on like YouTube or something like that, but they were all bad. I love this movie though. Highly recommend it. So again, back to what I was talking about, the isolationism, not being just the no people. Engaging with them, understanding what their needs, and being available. Again, I made the joke about sitting down in the basement locked away. Make sure people actually know where to find you. And if you can do it face-to-face instead of over email or instant messenger or Slack or whatever, much better for people outside of our particular industry, because of course we don't like to actually interact with people. Your incident response plans need to involve these other people. Like I said, when the world's ending, you need to be able to know who to reach out to. But then you also need to know, what are these people going to do when I reach out to them? Do they know what they need to do? We need to document this stuff. So there needs to be a communication. And then when we go and test these plans, they should be involved in those tabletop exercises. And then when we're done, we should tell people, how did it work? What were the lessons learned? What were we doing really well? What do we really suck at and need to focus on? These are all very important things. We also need to make sure that as part of our engagement with these folks, as we're communicating, we're creating a security culture inside of our organization. And there's basically two ways of doing it. One is very upfront, very overt. There's a security culture conference going on in Oslo next week, which I had hoped to attend, but unfortunately cannot. But they talk about these very obvious upfront ways of helping to build a security culture. But you can also, again, kind of under the radar build this culture. Again, through engagement, through communication, and targeting that communication to your audience. Again, not something typically security professionals are very good at. But the message that you give to line-level employees is going to be very different than the message that you need to give to your executives, your C-level, the board of directors. So you want to target those messages to those particular people. And again, look for little subversive ways to sneak security into the conversation, to go offer help instead of waiting for them to come to you, and build that confidence inside of the organization. A great tool for that is around dashboards. And this is one of the things that I see in a lot of organizations they do very poorly. They don't measure what they do. They don't report on it, so there are no dashboards to show people, or what they have is meaningless. I sat in one meeting with a group of board of directors that were really serious about security because one of their competitors was in the New York Times, and they want to make sure that they're not in the New York Times. So they have their security people come in and talk to them. So they put up these slides and they show this dashboard, and it's all EPS, ticket volumes, all this stuff that nobody at that level would even care about. And you've got maybe 5 minutes to talk to these people. Do you really want to spend your time talking about events per second with them? No. You want to go and talk about, this is the threat to our organization because this is that crown jewel that's important to all of you, and this is what we're doing about it. Because you have about that long. And so when you present dashboards to these folks, that's the kind of information you need to have on there. But your SOC manager, sure as heck, she wants to know EPS and ticket volumes and all of this other stuff. So again, we need to make sure that we're talking to the audience and we're giving them the information that is going to be actionable and meaningful to them. And here's another one that I see so often inside of organizations. Hiding data that is ugly, unattractive, paints in a bad light, whatever. There's an old saying that the cover-up is always worse than the crime. So if a security organization, if a SOC goes and paints the most rosy picture possible using dicey methods, it will last for a while. You might get away with it for a long time. But ultimately, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and you're shooting your company in the foot. If something goes bad, if you have a serious security incident inside of your environment, and things don't go the way that they were supposed to. We followed the plan, but the plan wasn't appropriate for it, so we didn't realize that this bad actor had been in our environment for a year and a half, right? And then once we did find out, it was, we fumbled the ball. We didn't take care of this properly. Convey that message because it's a learning process. You're not going to get everything perfect all the time. If you paint a really rosy picture to leadership, then that doesn't help you address any of the issues you've got inside of your environment. So don't hide the dirty laundry, right? Get it out there. Again, tailor the message to the audience. You don't want to go and have it, be a big animated PowerPoint slide saying, we screwed up, but, let them know. So this is a favorite of mine, shiny object syndrome. I had a boss who was a salesperson's delight. He wanted every cool box with blinking lights. He didn't know how it was going to fit inside the environment. He didn't even know if we needed the box, but if they sold it right, he's breaking out the checkbook, getting this thing in. And then what would happen? He'd plug it in, turn it on, sure enough, the lights would turn on, and then we would not touch it again, probably ever, until we need that space. Or more likely, we need the power outlet because, we had an issue with power management. But anyway, shiny object syndrome we see all the time. People will go, organizations will go, and they will buy a box, and they will plug it in, and they're going to go and say, okay, it's cool, it's new, it's sexy, and it's a magic bullet that's going to solve all of our security problems. How many people in here have encountered that in their own organizations or know where it's happened elsewhere? Yeah. And every so often, of course, there is that new hotness, right? So APT was the big hotness a little while ago, right? And then before that, it was going to SIEM. And before that, it was SIM. Before that, log management. right? All of these cool things. You wanted to go out, checkpoint is so passe. Where's your Palo Alto, man? That's the sweet stuff there. Yeah, it's a constant evolution. So if you're constantly chasing after that magic bullet, that new hotness, are you really improving your security program? Are you really improving your SOC functionality? Are you helping your incident handlers do their jobs? Probably not. So one of the key things around this that you want to think of, and it's something in my professional life we're continuing to advise our clients, don't think about security as a project. It's a program. Change the thinking to that. And help the business change their thinking to that. Because these threats that we're facing are constantly evolving. We need to evolve along with it. So if we go and if we're thinking about security as a project and we're only looking within a budget cycle, we're never going to get to a point where we feel comfortable, right? We're never going to be perfect, but we want to get to a point where we're comfortable, where we think we've got the tools, the people, the processes in order to handle these security issues. So we need to be thinking 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. And again, we need to be engaging with the business because they for sure are looking 3 years, 5 years down the road, probably even further. And so to that end, again, chasing after the new hotness is not going to help you in that particular area. Now, one thing that will help, and a good way to spend your limited resources, is around automation. The more you can automate that, what I like to think of as knuckleheaded stuff, right? The more efficient you're going to be, the more effective you're going to be as incident handlers and incident responders. So, and it can be as simple as we've got a blacklist of IP addresses. When we get notification from the particular ISAC that we're a member of, we probably, since we trust this particular source, can just add that to our list of blacklist IP addresses. We don't need to have a expensive, highly trained level 2 or level 3 incident handler, incident responder, spend a lot of time to go and generate a ticket that goes off to our security engineers so that they can go and introduce this into the system. We could probably automate that. Our ticketing system, there's probably ways in which we can automate that with our SIM to help generate some of these reports and dashboards that we need. Automation is a great place to go. Gets you an opportunity to use your tools more effectively. And again, free up those resources so that they can be doing things of higher value to the business. Blind spots. Oh, I love blind spots. These can be physical blind spots. For example, I worked with a company not too long ago that had gone through a merger with another company. It was actually an acquisition, right? So they bring this company in, they hook it into their network, and they're running into all of these problems. And the SOC is getting in all of this data, but the data isn't necessarily making sense to them based off of what they know. Well, it turns out that there was an R&D portion of this company that they had acquired that wasn't part of the network. They weren't following any of the specific standards. And the company that they merged with, it was a blind spot to them. So as soon as they merged, it was a blind spot to the parent company now. And it took them ages to go through and spend tons of money trying to figure out what is this weirdness in our environment. You can have organizational blind spots. This R&D department being one example. It could be a group of engineers, maybe overseas, maybe some developers out there. And your perimeter nowadays isn't where you've got your cool Palo Alto set up, right? It's wherever your data exists. So if your data is out in the cloud, that's your perimeter. If your data is with some software developers out in India, sitting off of a little VPN connection back to your corporate network, that's your perimeter as well. So you have to make sure that from an organizational perspective, you as the security team, the SOC, you understand exactly what your organization does look like. Network blind spots, of course, are a fun one too. Typically where we see this is anybody out there ever run into what we, I think, very kindly call shadow IT, where you got somebody go and decide to plug in their own wireless access point or their own switch and run their own little network off, under their desk or whatever. Yes, yes. That's good stuff. We really like that as security professionals, don't we? Woohoo! So there are a lot of ways to address these, right? And a lot of you have probably done them. You've got network discovery tools out there. Again, hopefully you're working with, say, HR to understand what all of these various departments are from an organizational perspective. Hopefully you as a security organization are getting hooked into new projects with the company at the beginning instead of, say, at the end where security just kind of gets bolted on the side. So you have that kind of fun stuff going on. But then how do you know how well you're doing in this particular regard? Well, it's a little bit hard to measure something as a negative, right? If it doesn't exist, how can you measure it? Well, there are a couple of different ways that you can attack this from a sheer metrics perspective, right? Go and look at the number of devices under management. Does that look similar to what you're seeing in the SOC for the logs that are coming in? So if there's a good asset management system, a CMDB, something like that in your environment, again, automation, maybe tying that into some of your tools to do a little diff to see what's going on in your environment, that can help address some of those blind spots. Oh, and it's not quite related to this slide, but I didn't know where else to put it. There is a drive out there in the industry where if you do have a good NOC, a Network Operations Center, and you need a SOC, just put those two together. Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. A NOC and a SOC, while they may see a lot of the same data, while they may be using some of the same tools, their mandates are very different. And I can tell you from experience, the NOC will take all of the resources away from the SOC if possible. If there's an operational issue related to the network, they don't care what's happening from a security perspective. All they care about is getting that network back up and running, right? So resist that urge. There are a few very rare instances where I've seen this work, but 99% of the time it's a bad idea. Don't do it. And don't let your friends do it either. This is another one which I was just talking about. Everything is ad hoc. We have, including in this room, smart, talented, capable security professionals. We have forgotten more than a lot of other people in our industry will ever know. We have a lot of institutional knowledge from our organizations, and it makes impact when we do have to go and respond to an issue. That we know, hey, we have this insider issue going on, I need to call Barb in HR and get her hooked in on this because I'm pretty sure this is going to be actionable, right? That's great, that's fantastic. But then what happens when you win the lottery? And I did switch from you get hit by a bus because lottery is a lot more positive. But what happens when you're gone, right? If you're constantly doing things ad hoc because you've got all this great stuff in your head, when you try to go on vacation, when you need to go to the doctor's office, when you're sick, when you win the lottery, what happens? Your phone is ringing off the hook because nobody knows how to do anything. I don't know about you, but I like going on vacation. And I like my phone not ringing from work. So if we document these things, if we've got good processes and procedures, then in theory, people coming in behind us can fill our shoes when we step away or get promoted or what have you, right? And then when we're documenting this stuff, we can't just go document it and say, done, I'm documented, everything is perfect. No. We need to have lifecycle management on this stuff, right? We need to go back and revisit it. We need to make edits. Because what happens if you create a process or procedure and then you never change it? Easy. everybody stops using it because it no longer applies. Oh yeah, we've got that written down, but really you need to do this and this and this instead. Now, we need to have that go back into the process documentation. We need to keep this alive and keep going. And if we're doing everything ad hoc all the time, how do we know that we're not missing things, right? Maybe we've done the same process over and over again, say, related to phishing. That's great. But what happens when not only did we get phished, but we had something else happen over here? If all we're focusing on is what we've got stuck in our head around ad hoc, and then meanwhile that was just meant as a distraction so that somebody could go and get at our e-commerce server, well, that's not good. If we've got a good process here in how we're handling these types of events, then we can make sure that we're paying good attention to the rest of the environments as well. Maybe make that connection that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to. And we need to make sure that as we're going along, we're continuing to not just improve our documentation, but we're improving our tooling at the same time. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean going out and buying a new shiny box. In a lot of organizations we see, the tools that they've already got, they're maybe using 30% of the capabilities. So maybe we start investigating using a little bit more of it, getting a little bit more value out of this. Again, using our resources better. Maybe it's going through and we haven't tuned our SIM in a long time. So maybe our use cases are no good anymore. Maybe our rules are no good anymore. Maybe we haven't updated our log sources. So again, we've got this blind spot in our organization. We need to go back and constantly reevaluate these things, document things, keep them going in a nice, orderly, measurable way. And again, when we talk about metrics, when we talk about analytics, the dashboards, communicating our value to the organization, we need to be able to measure what we're doing. And anything that is worth doing is worth measuring. So if we're constantly doing things ad hoc, trying to come up with some useful metrics is impossible. I don't care how good of an Excel wizard you might be. Garbage in, garbage out, my friend. Oh, man. So mean to me. All right, this is another one that I love. I was, about a year ago, we were called in to help them build a SOC as a response to a major security incident that this company had. And we knew it, the business knew it, so we go in and we sit down with the security team. And the first question I asked them was, okay, what did you guys learn from this? And not the moral lesson. I mean, when you guys go back and did your postmortem, what did you discover? Where were the breakdowns in this? Dead silence, not a bit. Nobody inside of their security organization had gone back to look to see what went wrong. All they cared about was fixing it and then hoping nobody noticed. Again, back to not communicating your failures to the organization, right? They found out because they called us in to consult to help them fix it. So they hadn't learned from their own mistakes. And you learn far more from those than your successes. So you do need to make sure that you do those postmortems. That should be part of your incident response plan and your incident response process. You should every so often go back and revisit these as well. It's one of the things that I think the medical community does very well for doctors. They have that M&M, probably saw it on House or Grey's Anatomy or one of those doctor-y drama shows. But they go and they have the doctor stand up there and talk through what happened, right, with a group of their peers. And they break it down. And it's not meant to punish anybody or embarrass anybody. It's to come up with a better approach for the next time this kind of thing happens. And we need to be confident enough in what we do and how we do it to be able to cast that critical eye back at ourselves and say, yeah, what could I have done better? Right? So you definitely need to learn from your own mistakes. Learn from the mistakes of others too. We have opportunities like these conferences where we can sit around and talk shop, outside of the sessions or having a drink in the evening festivities or what have you. And that's a great opportunity to do this. But your company may be part of one of the ISAC, some kind of a security sharing community. Maybe it's just a forum that you get on, but maybe sometimes you're meeting face to face. You can get some great information out of those too. And of course, just checking some of the, the IRC channels that are out there, or some of the other organizations like SANS and stuff like that. So you have an opportunity to learn from others. Those metrics and analytics that I keep coming back to. Again, if you've got good data coming in and you've got good analytical tools to help you analyze it, you can glean a lot of knowledge from those. For example, maybe we're spending too much time processing tickets that have little value to the business, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense, say, if we're in manufacturing and we're spending a lot of time running around addressing threats that are more likely to happen to somebody in the financial industry, for example. But we're burning a lot of hours and resources, worrying about stuff that isn't a direct threat to us right now. So that can help you refocus your energies, right? So gotta be open to the experience. There's always something to learn. And especially learning at these conferences is pretty good too. Just an hour before in this room, I learned something new. And I love that. That's why I like coming to these things. Watching too much and or not enough. Yes, those are not mutually exclusive. So, for example, I went into one environment where they were a giant Microsoft shop, and they had a high level of paranoia. So what did they do? They turned on as much logging as was possible without crashing the network. They logged everything, and they had everything coming into their SIM. And they had to have this giant oversized SIM because the amount of logs that they were bringing in. And the primary focus was on the insider threats, right? So, yeah, we want to have all of these cool Microsoft logs. We want to know what's going on here and who's doing this and who's doing that. Meanwhile, they were neglecting other parts of their environment, right? So, like, for example, they had no logging from their DNS servers. So they have this flood coming this way of maybe useful information about 1% of 1% of 1% of what they were seeing. And then they had whole other sections where they had minimal logging or no logging at all. So from an incident handler perspective, let's say we've got some kind of malware running rampant in our environment. Those Windows logs might be useful, but I'll bet you those DNS logs would be way more useful, especially if it's one of these variants that likes to go to these randomly generated domain names that are out there. Come up with a nice simple script, look for some weirdness out there, and boom, you have a bunch of actionable data that exists that you might not see in your Microsoft logs. So again, you want to go make sure that you have enough logs coming in. You want to have the right kinds of logs coming in. And again, you want to focus your attention on what's most important to the business. So you need to be talking to the business. Find out what those crown jewels are. And quite often, it's an interesting conversation to have with the business, because they may not always think about it in that way. What are the crown jewels? What are the most important things in this environment? Because you'll get the person from R&D in there, and they'll have a very strong opinion one way. And then the operations folks are going to have a very strong opinion about something else, finance, on and on and on. But then getting them in a room, having this discussion, and then having to go through and figure this out is not only good for us, because again, we can focus our efforts, but it helps to, again, start building that security culture inside of the organization. Get them thinking about what is really important to us. Maybe some of the stuff we thought was important isn't as important as it should be, or as we thought it would be. So we want to do that. And again, having a good asset management inside of your environment helps with that once those crown jewels are identified, because you may go and say, okay, yeah, it's this application, and there's this database that goes with it. Okay, great. Yeah, but we've got a virtualized environment and we've got some shared storage, so okay, I guess that's included in here too. Oh, but then you know what? We actually have to rely on this other thing over here because we're pulling data from there. Oh, and we've got this third party involved that comes in to maintain this system. So now this is constantly evolving. But if you don't have those kinds of conversations, and then you don't have the data that you need to go and truly define what this crown jewel is, again, makes it hard to focus your energies. And so you do need to make sure that you're understanding those dependencies inside of your environment. And sometimes it's a thought process. I'm a packet. Where do I go? So you do that. Run around like a packet, document where all the stuff goes, come up with these dependencies, right? An audit or an assessment, those are valuable tools. Again, an audit is going to be very specific. It's going to do a really deep dive. They're painful. They're uncomfortable. They have their uses. I'm more of a fan of the assessment. And then if you find something particularly worrisome, then do an audit. But those can really help, again, make sure that you're focusing your resources. And don't have a staffing, hiring, training, or retention plan. Because you don't want to bring in really qualified people into your environment, right? You don't want to train them and make them even better. And you sure don't want to keep them around once you've actually gone through all this effort to train these people, right? We want them out the door so we can get a fresh batch in. No, you absolutely, positively have to have this. And I know I'm speaking to the choir on this one for sure, because we all want to be a part of this. But we need to have a plan. We can't do this ad hoc any more than we can do incident handling and response ad hoc. We need to have something. We need to have a roadmap. We need to have a succession plan. That was always one of the things when I was a security manager. I wanted to make sure that I had people behind me that when I got promoted, they were going to be able to step up and keep excelling, probably even do better than me. So I was very happy that I had a very strong team, and a lot of them were a lot smarter than me at security, and that's okay. That's good. That's great. And I made sure that I had a plan to retain them. I had a plan to keep them engaged, and I had a plan to help them keep developing their skills. And those people are still with that company. I'm long gone, but they're doing very well for themselves because we had those particular pieces in place. And if I had a nickel for every organization that I've gone into that said, we have a huge problem here, I'd be able to give you all a lot of nickels. Number one problem that we run into at organizations, people. That even if they've got great tools and they're using them well, even if they've got great processes and they're well documented and well executed, people is always the issue. So you have to have these plans. And again, you have to communicate them to your HR department, to your finance department. Because when you open up that rec to bring that person in, a great way to get them to sign off is to go and say, this is the person who's coming in, this is their job description, but here's the plan for keeping them around, making them an integral part of this organization. And I don't know about you, but having to go through the process of opening a rec and all of the paperwork that goes along with it sucks. I have a lot better things to do with my time than go through all of that nonsense. So I would much rather keep my staff around than have to go hire some schmo off the street. Although, you never know when a schmo off the street might have a useful piece of information for you just before you go into a meeting. Yeah, so one of the things you do want to do as part of this is, as a security manager, you want to think about what happens if person X leaves. How do I fill that particular gap? But then we as security professionals can think about how can I become that person X that my manager is going to worry about keeping me around. So doing things like coming to CircleCityCon or the B-sides or what have you is a great way of doing that. And a lot of these happen on the weekends. Hopefully, they're in your particular area, so you don't necessarily have to travel. But then get the company to pick up the tab every so often for you to get to hit the road. One of the things you definitely need to think about in this particular aspect too is around workload. You don't want to burn your people out, right? And we don't want to get burned out either. So as security professionals, one of the things that we can do to help our SOC, help our response, is make sure that we're not bogged down with a ton of busy work, right? We want to be doing the fun stuff. We would much rather be, if we're not responding to something, we'd much rather be, again, improving our tooling, working on our training, doing something actionable, sitting around and just moving tickets around just because we need to move some tickets around. That's boring stuff. Nobody wants to do that, right? So we need to be empowered, and if we're leaders, we need to empower our people. Again, don't wait for your manager to go and empower you. Take it upon yourself. Find these opportunities where you can go and say, hey, we can improve something here to make all of our lives better, which means that we're going to want to stick around longer. So yeah, make sure that you're growing your own skills even when your organization won't. A bonus. It's okay to ask for help. It really is. Asking for help is the first step. I have known many security professionals. I've known many organizations who will refuse to ask for help. They will be so far underwater on a particular issue that no sunlight reaches them. And they will refuse to ask anybody to throw them a lifeline. Don't be afraid to ask, because I guarantee if you're running into a particularly hard problem that you can't solve, maybe you're dealing with a particular, you find that you've got a bad actor inside of your environment and you see where they are and you're now able to keep track of them, but you're not really sure how they got in. Ask for help. Hey, I've got this issue. What have you done, colleague, to address something similar to this? Have you seen this before? It's okay to ask. You don't have to give people, confidential information or anything like that, but just ask for help. And sometimes they'll go and say, I don't know. Oh, but I know this one guy who probably does. Let me hook you up with them. Right? It's okay to ask. Don't be afraid. And again, have that confidence in yourself to ask for help. And also, speaking as a consultant, it's okay to hire a consultant. Don't be afraid. We're very nice, some of us. A lot of organizations will feel threatened by consultants coming in because they think that they're just going to come in and steal their jobs and try to outsource everything. A good consultant won't do that. So look for good consultants. And my contact information is on the last slide. All right, so we've got a couple of more minutes before the session ends. Anybody got any questions? Yes.
You mentioned that, especially on the communication portion, the concept of guidance actually interacting with SOCs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see guidance as being an integral part of SOCs, or something that is simply associated to outside of it?
No, it's integral. It needs to be a part. It helps set direction, helps set goals, and of course helps, again, the SOC and the incident handlers focus their resources where they're going to be most useful. Yes, sir. Yeah. Hi. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, so typically the SOC managers can be much more operational. So the skill set there, obviously they have to have some technical background. And they need to be strong communicators. But they also need to be strong people managers, right? So they're really wearing 3 hats. So to go and have that governance piece also on his or her shoulders is typically a bridge too far for that person. Because it's very difficult if you're trying to communicate these security issues on one hand and then receive back the feedback related to the business, the drivers, those kinds of things. So if you have that governance piece up on the top that the SOC manager is working closely with, then that's where you get that kind of feed down into the SOC of that information.
In terms of retention, a lot of times we see people leave a SOC. It's because they've been burned out doing the same job over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Or they feel that their skills are no longer developing because they're doing the same job over and over again.
Uh-huh.
And we see in other areas of security, right, that you rotate jobs and everything to keep people fresh. I was wondering if you've seen any really good practices for rotating the staff and making sure that people continue to grow and head off that burnout from that point.
I haven't seen anybody do a really good job of that. Sorry. Typically what happens is you have that bottleneck. Your tier 1 folks that are doing the monitoring, right? They really want to be that tier 3, that super awesome technical resource that just knows stuff and just can light the world on fire with their abilities. They all want to be that. So when I was talking about the training plan and the retention plan, if that's the direction that those folks want to go, giving them those tools and those opportunities to hopefully flex those muscles in there. But the repetition, the monotony, that's where that automation can come in to help address some of that. And then again, trying to get a good mix of improving the tooling, improving the processes. The engagement with the business doesn't necessarily have to be only the governance piece or the SOC manager. It can be the SOC personnel as well that takes advantage of it to learn more about the institution.
I like that. Yeah, so give them more, as opposed to rotating technology-wise, perhaps rotate the business.
Yes.
I like that a lot. All right, thanks.
Sure. Yes.
Jumping back to the point about interacting with the end users.
Uh-huh.
Any success stories from working with management and say the security folks implement additional end user training or implement a security awareness program, build up the user base to maybe reduce the workload or the stress on the SOC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was one company that I did a consulting gig on about 3 years ago, and they had an outstanding security awareness program. They would do some of the stuff that we're kind of familiar with. They'd have the posters up and stuff like that, in the break rooms and what have you. But they would have monthly raffles. They would have quizzes every so often where people could win prizes and stuff like that. There were they would have secret contests related to their phishing exercises. So they would send out the test messages, for example, and then the folks who didn't click on it and did report it in as being a valid thing, they would win a little something. Maybe it was a physical thing, maybe it was just an at a girl or what have you. But they were, again, doing this kind of life cycle maintenance kind of, they would go back to it and they would look at things. So this was something that they had started, I think, about 5 years prior. So this is now 8 years along, and they're constantly evolving it and improving it, both by looking at themselves and areas that they know that they need to address because they've got the metrics and the analytics, but then also engaging back with the community, the users, and say, how else do you think we should do this? Another thing that they did was they offered for the family members, every quarter or so, the security team would put on a little security seminar for those folks. So how to avoid getting malware on your machine at home. How to identify in the spam coming in, what might be some kind of a really lame phishing attack or whatever. So, they're not just providing the information to their employees, but they're providing it to the wider community as well. So, they're getting a little something extra from the company.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure, yes?
You were saying, in a way, security shouldn't be existing in a silo in the back.
Right.
I agree with that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people saying that security should be more of a consulting or an advisory role outside of the IT area, controlled by the person that's not IT management related. The reason why I say this, and I partially agree with them, is because sometimes you get a pure IT manager trying to manage the security program. The guy knows jack shit and derails the whole thing.
Right.
So the expenditures of security and the role that you're going to follow with security is pretty much not aligned with the organization. So I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first I will point you to the PBC Security Podcast, where we've covered this several times. So go listen to the entire back catalog, and then stay subscribed for new episodes as they come out. So really quick, because we're bumping into the next talk here. Our recommendation, and I mean us on the podcast, is that ideal world, you have a CSO or CISO that is equal to the CIO, right? Security comes in through its own reporting structure that is not tied to IT. That is number one. But that being said, and they have control over their own budgets and everything else. That being said, one of the things that we're seeing that's particularly effective is this concept of a fusion center, which is like a SOC on steroids, which instead of security sitting there by themselves, they've got IT sitting around with them too, and they can grab them if there's a security incident. Grab the network guys, grab the web developers. Let's huddle up and see what we need to do for this. And that kind of model is extremely powerful. They still have their separate reporting structures, but now that fusion center manager becomes their functional manager, and he's just got the two reporting trees that he's got to deal with. All right? Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. This has been fun. Let's do it again next year.